Let's get started. I'm sure more folks will be coming in, but we are rolling. Hey everybody, welcome to a TopSoil webinar. Mitchell Hora with you, and excited to continue on the conversation of 45Z from a guy that's got a lot of experience in the ins and outs of what's going on, and just experience to share on how's the sausage get made, so to say. Tim Gannon's my guest. I'll turn it over to him here in just a little bit. And Tim's been involved in some of our stuff in the past, and Tim, really appreciate you taking the time here. But to set the stage for anybody that's new, Continuum is a software company that I founded about 10 years ago. I'm a farmer from Southeast Iowa, and we've built a software to help farmers quantify and verify their field level carbon intensity score. We've been doing this in hopes that 45Z is going to get across the finish line and that feedstock and farmers will have a seat at the table and be able to be utilized as a decarbonization lever. But we need more of the actual rules. But I just believe in farmers having a positive story to tell, and 45Z provides some economic incentive to tell that story. But ultimately, it's all about the data. We still need some clarity on that. But again, that's where we got Tim on. So I'm going to turn things over to Tim and let him introduce himself more. But to kind of set the stage, Tim's an Iowa boy, just like me, Iowa farm guys, which is great, and why I think we've been able to get along well. And Tim's had numerous roles at USDA, working under Secretary Vilsack for both in the Obama administration and the Biden administration. So a lot of experience there. And but his farm, he's got a Century Farm in Jasper County, kind of central Iowa area. And in his most recent role at USDA, he served as both the senior advisor to Secretary Vilsack and the chief of staff to the undersecretary for farm production and conservation. That oversees, my understanding, that's the group that oversees NRCS and FSA. I think they combined those together. And Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, but he was the chief of staff for that effort. And so Tim was really right in the middle of a lot of these efforts to create these new markets, to improve crop insurance options, implement historic conservation efforts. Obviously, they had lots of stuff going on with the Biden administration there for climate smart ag efforts, lots and lots of effort going on. And Tim was right at the forefront of a lot of it. So I'm going to turn off the slides and stuff here for now and just have a conversation. For everybody following along, you can utilize the Q&A function or the chat. We want to hear from your questions. But Tim, really appreciate you hopping on here today, sharing some insights. Maybe tell us a little bit more, about yourself, kind of set the stage, and build off of me teeing you up.
Thanks, Mitchell. It's great to be with everyone today. I think it's been maybe about 2 years since I was on before. That was kind of at the point in time where some information on the 40B blenders credit had been released, but not the full set of information that was some good, some bad, and then which really then kicked off like 6-7 very intense months where we worked on 45Z at the end of the Biden, over the course of the end of the Biden administration, which culminated in Secretary Vilsack announcing the USDA interim final rule on low carbon biofuel feedstocks in January 2025. So just a little over a year ago. And right now it's a pretty interesting time for agriculture. I mean, we say that all the time, but obviously with where inputs are and where prices are, there's no doubt that new markets would be incredibly helpful and beneficial. And Mitchell and I were talking about this earlier. Some of the work around 45Z and lower carbon feedstocks has kind of been following behind the work of a lot of farm groups and leaders in getting higher RVOs for biodiesel or year-round E15 legislation through. And so it maybe hasn't been top of mind or the first thing that people are thinking about and talking about. But I think that there's still an incredibly strong market that's available if we can land this in a way that really puts farmers in the game, with the ability to benefit from the investments they make in whatever you want to call the practices. They were climate smart practices during the Biden administration. I think now the in vogue term is much more regenerative practices. You can be more generic about that and just call them in-field practices.
Yeah.
But they all do the same thing. They lower the carbon intensity, which is what is important for 45Z, because even though all of the other clean energy or green energy, whatever you want to say, tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act were repealed, that was the one that survived, not only survived, but was extended in the reconciliation package that Congress approved last summer and the president signed. And so, obviously there is interest out there in it. There is an ability for biofuel producers already, I think, to take advantage of it, especially where they can capture and store carbon. But we're still waiting to find out what's going to happen for farmers. So I think, this is an important period of time that we have to continue to advocate so that USDA kind of has the cover from those who are going to benefit from it, so that they're not just saying, no, we think farmers need this, that the Treasury Department and other parts of the administration are hearing from agriculture that this would be a good thing for a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And I've been hearing that too, right? In DC, farmers are one of many voices. There are lots of people chattering all the time, and unfortunately, it's kind of one of those, what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. Sometimes you gotta kind of remain being the squeaky wheel. And for an ag side of things, we're being squeaky about a lot of different stuff. And 45Z is maybe on the list, but it's not always the top thing on the list. And I'm referring to things that corn growers are pushing for, Farm Bureau, some of those ag advocacy groups. They're trying to push for a farm bill and E15 and trade and what are we going to do with tariffs and prices are too high and commodity values are too low and then also we want RVOs because we need renewable fuel standard the volumetric obligations and we need 45Z. And so I think it gets very cloudy there when you have all of these priorities that are all top priority and there's no real rank ordering. And Tim, before we started here, obviously Secretary Vilsack was really the champion for 45Z and understood how to move it and get across the finish line. And I know that there's still some great folks at USDA that are working to get this done. Our buddy Bill Hohenstein being one of those key folks that's obviously been a champion for this for a long time, a career guy who gets it, right, and understands how big of a deal this is. And I do know that there's a letter that Senator Joni Ernst and some of the other biofuels champions, they do have a letter that hopefully we'll get over to those secretaries sometime this week, just urging that things do get done. So I know that there's still interest and there's chatter to get it done. But yeah, unfortunately, don't have a key champion for it like Secretary Vilsack that just made it happen, right? And got it to the finish line, got as far as what you guys could obviously do given the condensed time frame, and now it's got to be taken the rest of the way amidst all this cloudiness and uncertainty. But maybe let's talk about that story a little bit, because my understanding of like the USDA getting involved in 45Z, the Cliff Note story that I've heard is there was a meeting or conversation with Treasury who was trying to put together the rules for 45Z. The farmer piece is not in the statute. It's not in the law at all. And my understanding was they told the secretary and whoever else was there, like, hey, if you want the farmer piece, the feedstock to be included in 45Z, you write the rules. You go figure it out, and then we'll consider it. Is that like actually kind of the gist of how it went down?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, 40B and 45Z kind of all part of the same conversations where,
Sure.
we were really, I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of it was based on carbon, greenhouse gas
For
emissions,
sure.
and so obviously agriculture has the ability not just to lower their emissions, but sequester.
Yep.
And so but all of that is not well understood. And so in those conversations, we're having to do a lot of education and re-education for people who, didn't understand agriculture, don't understand agriculture, are very disconnected from it. And some people who have misconceptions about biofuels and about ag practices. And so it wasn't, it was not an easy lift getting to where we got, but, definitely with the idea that, hey, if you guys want this tax credit to succeed, you're going to need farmer buy-in. It's going to have to work not just for the people who are going to claim the credit, but for those that they source from. And if you from our standpoint, we wanted the market for farmers. We're thinking about things that are good for farm income, as well as environmental and ecological outcomes as a result of the practices. But we really thought that if you're seriously trying to drive down greenhouse gas emissions, you got to have the farmer involved.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm thinking back about this. Right, this has been a long journey as I think about this. So, and some of the folks that are listening in today that are maybe a little newer, remember 40B was the SAF credit. So 40B gave a credit for sustainable aviation fuel production, and it had a feedstock component to it, but it was a bundled approach, and that's where there was a lot of the pushback, right? So there was if you wanted to qualify, if I recall, you had to do no-till, cover crops, and use a nitrogen stabilizer in order to get a nutrient management thing. Yes, thanks. You had to do some qualifying nutrient management practices, and you had to do all three to be able to qualify and stuff. So there was a lot of pushback on that, and we were part of that, and a lot of other farmers are on here too. And then really my take was USDA listened to that, and then when you guys published the updated feedstock calculator for potential to be utilized for biofuels, right? It wasn't specifically like, there's no tie-in yet that this calculator was going to be for 45Z, but the updated calculator didn't have the bundle approach. You could choose one or multiple practices, and I think part of that was driven by a lot of that feedback, and we were very aggressive in helping farmers participate in the public comment periods and whatnot. Can you speak about those a little bit on how does the USDA factor in those public comments when there is a request for public comment? Like, what is the process for on you guys' side after we submitted all those comments?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the kind of rule, because take the rule that the secretary announced at the end of or January 15th was what was the date, 2025.
Yeah.
That was an interim final rule, so it took effect immediately.
Yeah.
It didn't yet have the connection it needed to the 45Z guidance.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, this is something, and I believe what the Biden administration released about 45Z a couple of days before that talked about USDA's ongoing work to quantify the effects of in-field practices, climate smart practices. So there was a little bit of pointing going on there, and that interim final rule took comments, and I think they got 300 and some comments, and I'm sure they ranged from very simple to pages and pages of data and analysis. And so the folks working on that rule at USDA and in the chief economist's office, I'm sure they went through them painstakingly and tried to figure out, okay, what was information that they didn't have available to them or didn't think about when they drafted it. And I'll remind everyone that I think the secretary announced the RFI for that started that rulemaking process in like late June of 2024, and by they had like a 30-day or 45-day window because we had to keep it short. And so by September we were really working like gung ho on getting that done so that it could be in place no matter what happened in the
Yeah,
election.
yeah.
Election
Right.
in November. It was going to be something that got done during the Biden administration because Secretary Vilsack told us we would get it done.
That's right. That's right.
And then obviously with it had to slot in with where and when they thought they were going to make an announcement on the guidance for 45Z.
Right.
But they like as you alluded to earlier, they didn't know how to do it
Yeah.
or didn't want to do it probably, or didn't have the bandwidth to do it, and said, "You guys figure it out." So we had to like keep them up to date on it and in the loop, and they were fine with it being an interim final rule.
Mhm.
Uh, so since then USDA has taken those comments and been reworking it, and I'm sure eliminating many of the references to climate smart agricultural practices.
Yeah.
Just
Just
like
changing the wording.
yeah,
Changing
there's
the wording.
there's going to be some wordsmithing to
Yeah.
make it fly with the current administration.
Yeah.
But it's where going back to you know if I have a drumbeat here, it's that I don't think I don't think it's a done deal yet
Yeah.
for the infield practices to be included in 45Z so that farmers can
Right.
really benefit from this until that final Treasury guidance comes out. And so I think behooves, amidst all of the things going on with farm bill hearings and whether we need more bridge payments because of the ag economy
Yeah.
and what's going on with input costs and trade deals, and will there be 15 or will there be final, when will the final RVOs be announced, amidst all that, for folks who are concerned about a new market for a lower carbon biofuel feedstock, like got to keep the pressure on so that they understand uh, they've got to see it through to the end.
So the letter, like I just briefly referred to from Senator Ernst and other folks in Senate, do those things matter? Like, do those help to
Yeah, I
like
mean,
prioritize stuff or like?
yeah, I mean, if Senator Ernst was there with Secretary Rollins and the Deputy Secretary the other day announcing the closure and sale of the USDA South building.
Mm,
So it's obviously someone that Secretary Rollins is talking to and working with, and if
yeah,
Senator Ernst has 5 minutes before that, she probably bent her ear on, hey, we really need your help to get this done.
yeah,
And for folks at the Department of Energy, for them to know that this big block of ag leaders, probably bipartisan, I would guess, are watching this and think it's important. They're either going to have to figure out how to do what those members of Congress wanted, or what those members of Congress said was the intent of the one big beautiful bill language on 45Z, or they're going to have to figure out a way to keep those people happy some other way.
yeah, yeah. So no, and I do think yeah, this piece does obviously have some good bipartisan support. It's changing the semantics about it a little bit, right? Changing the wording, and that's just DC, right? At least in my brief career in trying to understand DC, which a couple years ago I never even thought that I would need to be very involved at all, and would have never anticipated how involved I've had to get and how much I've had to just learn and educate myself about the process. But yeah, at least they are trying to keep some of that pressure on. And when I was in DC a couple weeks ago, I know some of the pushback is from some of the folks at the Department of Energy, especially some of the political folks, right, that Trump appointed, especially at the Department of Energy, right. There was a lot of big oil folks that are there, right, big oil and gas folks, that our message to them, and just thinking out loud for everybody on here as we're thinking about strategy and stuff, right, our message is, hey, this is a fight for liquid fuels here. And when we're fighting for liquid fuels, there's a lot of commonality amongst these players. We got to be thinking long term, thinking about what's good for ag, what's good for obviously for big oil folks, it's longevity of liquid fuels and the future of what energy in this country is going to look like. And hey, we can do things more sustainably. We can do things with these regenerative practices that lower the CI and open up markets. And I think a lot of these folks, our message has been, sure, we can play politics and stuff here domestically, but these fuels and stuff, they're playing in global markets, especially as we're looking at sustainable aviation fuel and marine biofuels and stuff. Like, yeah, we can ignore, CI or ignore some of these levers of decarbonization for domestic, policy, but we still got to play a global game as well, where these things, they are not going away. And
Yeah.
even domestically, this stuff is not going away. How do we keep moving in the right direction, no matter what you want to call it, and the semantics of it? And so I think they're catching on to that. I know there's a lot of conversation about that. And it's like, gosh, these markets are so huge as you're looking at the amount of fuel that we're burning in our vehicles every year, whether that be gasoline or diesel fuel. Just look at the or the aviation fuel market, the marine fuel market. These are hundreds of billions of gallons a year. Like, biofuels having a little chunk of that, like, it's not going to hurt these big oil guys from a long term, and it actually keeps the whole industry more viable. And obviously it brings opportunities for farmers and for the ag economy as well.
Well, and some of the trade deals that have been negotiated, those countries who are talking about buying biofuels from us want low carbon fuel.
Of course.
That's what they're interested in.
Yeah.
And so, we like, it's not. I mean, it's one big marketplace, and one of the complaints that oil companies have had, or the refiners at least have had, is if you start demarcating these states as year-round E15 and these states as others, it makes their job more difficult. So
Yeah.
they would rather have one playing field
Consistency.
of things. And so if we don't want to, if we don't want to lead in that effort to produce low carbon fuels, then someone else will.
Yeah.
And I don't think we would like that scenario.
I think that has to be the conversation in DC, right? It's like, hey, if we aren't going to lead in producing these low carbon biofuels, Brazil sure as heck will.
Yeah.
And already are. They are already
Yeah.
eating our lunch in a lot of cases in these things. And so we've got to think just bigger picture. And like, that was the last time when I was in DC a couple weeks ago, that was really my overall takeaway from that trip there is sometimes we miss the forest for the trees a little bit. And like, there was chatter about, well, the soybean group wants this and that's different than what the corn group wants. It's like almost every farmer who's part of one of those organizations is also contributing to the other. Like, why are we're just thinking a little too siloed, right? Or in this case of like liquid biofuels, whether it be a fossil fuel or a renewable fuel, it's like we're still on the same team more than not, and that needs to be factored in.
Yeah.
So that was a big piece of my last trip was, gosh, we've got to be thinking a little bit longer term, thinking a little bit more holistically than only what's good for one party. Obviously, got to be thinking of yourself first, but not just in the short term, also in the long term. And so I think those comments have to be brought about. But so one of the comments that I know there was a bunch of feedback on is the mass balancer book and claim thing, and I assume you don't know the answer of what it's actually going to be, but there was a bunch of feedback on that in the public comments. Does that matter? Does that move the needle? How do you think they, like, how, when you guys were gathering comment, like, how do you do some of those things, like when you hear it over and over and over, does that matter? Or is it like, nah, we still like,
It may matter. I mean, yes, I think it does matter. It may come down to a question of whether USDA or Treasury, either Treasury in the 45Z realm or USDA in its rulemaking capacity has the authority to get into, whether one of those systems can or should be, utilized, or whether it can offer any guidance into that. After 40B, summer of 2024,
yeah,
a lot. I mean, groups are coming in and talk about 45Z all the time, but there were like groups of ethanol producers, Growth Energy, Renewable Fuels Association, coming in and saying, you know, looking at how you guys did 40B, thinking that you're gonna not keep this bundling together because it's too limiting. Here are the things that we think still need to be figured out, and that mass balance versus book and claim, was already starting then to be one of the big talking points. And I think for us, at just given the amount of time we had, it was lower priority than figuring out, okay, in all these counties across the United States and all these different crops and all these different practices, how do we get the information pulled together and put into a rule? But obviously, once you start, and these folks are obviously already thinking about it, once you start, putting pencil to paper, how is this going to work in practice? It's something you got to figure out. And if USDA gets its work done sometime this spring or summer and has an update to the interim final rule, and Treasury likes it, and the administration says, "Yep, we want to include that," they're either going to have something figured out there, or they're going to have to, work with folks on the Hill to try and figure out a legislative fix to that, so that so that the other piece of guidance that when it was first proposed in legislation in 2022, was way down the list of things people were concerned about, as opposed to, Corsia versus Greet and things like that. But like, obviously, as we get closer and people are doing this and not just talking about it, it's something that has to be clear so that people have that certainty.
Yeah. Obviously we've been pushing really hard on that, and our overall takeaway on, the technical guidelines that you were a part of publishing, we thought they were pretty dang good. We had very few pieces where we're really like, hey, we don't necessarily like this, and think out loud, just so everyone's aware, a couple of them. One of them was like the STIR calculator. Okay, so there's a tillage intensity rating, soil tillage intensity rating, I think is what STIR stands for. It's a calculator where you plug your tillage practices into that, and then it kind of spits out a score, and that then tells you, are you no-till, reduced till, or conventional till. We think that that's, it's kind of an old, clunky, outdated tool. We're like, hey, what I told USDA when I met with them a couple weeks ago is just better define what is no-till, what's reduced till, what's conventional till, and just have it be a one-step process versus two steps to still get the outcome. So something like that. The book and claim, obviously, we've been pushing aggressively for versus mass balance. But other than that, like a lot of the definitions, how to get this stuff verified, like it's all very doable, and we proved it. Like we did go through an audit based on the systems put together. It's very much doable. Like I really think it can work, and that's what we've been still saying, hey, let's get this across the finish line. Now, my understanding of what's to come here is that technical guideline goes through OMB review, and I want to ask you about that process and your insights on that. But OMB is the Office of Management and Budget. It's over at the White House, and they've got to review these rules and stuff before they actually go live. So there's a bit of a process here still. But then when that rule goes live, it'll be a final rule. You guys had it as an interim final. Now this is going to be the final. So no public comment period. It's a done deal. Now they could always adjust it, or they could always update and stuff. But at least what I was told is they don't anticipate that there will be a public comment period after this goes live.
I mean, my guess is they will take comments, just because I think that's the way USDA usually does it. Whether it's a proposed rule, an interim final rule, or a final rule, my guess is they'll take comments. But there won't be necessarily the need to have to respond to them in a time period. May come in and they say, oh yeah, we want to go in and do a technical fix to this, and you can do that a lot more easily than completely overhauling it.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I think maybe that's what they were getting at. Is like, I think they're always open for feedback, and that was appreciate you and Secretary Vilsack, and I think this administration too. They're very much open to feedback. They understand that, hey, this is a big deal. We need to get this right. But anyway, so getting that rule out there, getting some feedback on it, but then Treasury still has to tie it in. And I don't know how thoroughly you looked at the IRS rule from a couple weeks ago, but they basically just said there's going to be a 45Z CF FDCIC, or a 45Z specific feedstock CI calculator, and then they will utilize technical guidelines. I think they referred to something similar to those technical guidelines provided by USDA, and they mentioned a couple of the practices. So that was good, but it is still a process. At least my understanding is it's going to be a process on whether Treasury just basically points to the updated technical guidelines and says this is it, or if they kind of take some of the verbiage from it and craft that into their own thing. It's based on the USDA's guidance, but they ultimately kind of make their own. And working off of that, but I don't know which way that's gonna go yet.
So, with the OMB review, they'll want to make sure that the other players in 45Z and those would be Treasury, transportation, and energy are all good with things. And my guess is that because it's a biofuels thing, they may also rope EPA into it just because of RFS stuff.
Sure.
But they'll want to make sure that all of those players are good with it. And so that's one of the points where I have concern, because Department of Energy controls the GREET model. And so nothing, USDA could have the absolute best carbon intensity calculator, zero flaws, perfect in every way. But if the powers that be at the Department of Energy are opposed to, a reduction in the use of petroleum-based gasoline and diesel, and they think this is going to lead to that, they'll stand in the way. And USDA leadership will need to be at the forefront, saying this is important. And when frankly, my feeling is that, making E15 more available and making low carbon fuels available that, this tax credit would do, leads to some competition and leads to some better prices for consumers, which is obviously top of mind for folks in both parties right now. And so, I think that there will be arguments beyond just the, this will lead to, 45Z will lower carbon intensity of all these things by X%, and that's good for, A, B, and C. And it's like there will be other things that get into this conversation.
100%. I think the talking points are different, right? It's the talking points with OMB and some of the priorities for why we should get this done is more driven by affordability, viability of liquid fuels, opportunities for domestic markets for farmers, more than it's about lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, that was the original intent of it, but clearly that's why this is still on the table when a lot of its, a lot of the other Inflation Reduction Act programs got cut because they were a little siloed, right? And this is a little bit more holistic, and I think that has to be part of the conversation. Now, speak a little bit about how does it actually work when cross collaborating with these other agencies? Did you guys have set meetings on the calendar that they were out, or did you guys have a meeting and then be like, hey, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and have some to-dos, and what's the actual strategy look like? Or is it just kind of all over the place?
There'd be a couple different levels of meetings. There would be super technical meetings where career people who are smarter than I am would be arguing the merits of one study versus another, and what one group of researchers found versus another, and trying to come to consensus on what models to use and what information to use. And saw that play out in a big way in the lead up to 40B in terms of which of the which set of models were we going to use on land use change. And USDA won the day in a big way there, which is why, I thought some of what we did which is because we won the day in a big way, due to the work of the USDA staff, which is part of the reason why the fight over climate smart or regenerative ag practices got to be such a big deal, because for those who were opposed to what we were trying to do, it really became the last way they could stop
Sure, sure.
a really robust 45Z that I think would have unleashed a great new market.
Yeah.
So you have those very technical meetings. Then you have ones where um, some senior political folks would be
Sure.
involved. I put myself and Robert Bonney
Mhm.
in the mix there. And then when those if those didn't hammer things out, and there'd be people from the White House, there'd be people from Treasury, there'd be people from all kinds of different places, and everyone has a little bit different point of view, and and the for some of the folks at Treasury and IRS, both political and career, they just didn't think that the tax code was a place to be talking about no-till farming.
Sure.
Whether they understood it or not, or whether they understood, what could be done with it or not. They just didn't think the tax code was a place to do that. And so invariably with 40B and 45Z, final decisions were hammered out, Secretary Vilsack and others at a very senior level.
Yeah. And for some context too, what Tim's kind of getting at, some of the original stuff, it was the Corsia model versus the GREET model, and I don't recall right off the top of my head, but I think at that time, indirect land use change was like 7 or 9 points of impact under the GREET, and like 15 or 18 points or something like that under Corsia. I don't recall exactly, but it's that type of impact that okay, the other side conceded to USDA and said, okay, we'll go with your ILUC number, and that helped all of us by whatever 12 points or 15, or something like 10, 12 points. But then they dug their heels in then on the other side because they conceded on one thing. So that's kind of what you're getting at. Super interesting that it seems like that's still those conversations that are being had. And again, my viewpoint is we got to be thinking bigger picture of the viability, and it is a good thing that USDA is involved there, right, to actually educate what is no-till, what are cover crops, like what are these practices and why are they good beyond just their greenhouse gas impact,
Yeah.
but all of these other beneficial reasons to do these things anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and because the terms that everyone in the administration is using now, it's based around soil health and improving the viability and productivity of our soils, but we're still talking about cover crops and no-till,
Yeah.
and improving the timing and location and amount of application of nutrients, and so and as I used to always fight with people, like, aren't you guys the same ones who want us to do more on clean water in the Mississippi watershed? Like,
Exactly.
so you want these things, okay? You might not want these things for a biofuel tax credit, but if you want clean water, then you want farmers ramping up their use of these practices.
That's right, and that's why I'm involved in this. Right, is I believe that more family farms should be implementing these soil health practices, what I call them, because they follow the principles of soil health, and they're going to help you be more resilient long term, more profitable. They're going to improve your soil health, your nutrient use efficiencies, foster biodiversity, all these kind of positives. And yeah, CI is a positive outcome, but it's not the only one.
But
And I mean, on my farm, right? I mean, I'm in Washington County. Like, our crop goes to feed hogs. Most of our crop doesn't go to the ethanol plant. So that's also part of why we really like book and claim, to not disrupt the livestock industry. But yeah, it's like I just think that more family farms should be doing more of these practices, and this is the big carrot, the big opportunity to get that done. It just
and
happens to be under the guise of lowering the
and
CI.
and right now, CI is a much easier thing to calculate than change in the microbiome of
Right,
soil. So
for
like
sure.
like if what you care about is healthy soil, it's a little harder to say these practices you know move the needle enough that they should get a tax credit
Yeah.
versus the carbon intensity.
And that's I get hit up on that all the time of like or farmers or folks are like, well, why is this biofuels, and like, why is this not for livestock? It's like, well, there's already some precedent set up with the GREET model. There's 192 ethanol plants, so it's way easier to do this thing on 192 tax returns versus
Yeah.
all of these other. Those are at least some of what I tell them. I'm sure there's way more, and it was Inflation Reduction Act that was very focused on energy, right? So it's like, guys, you got to kind of reverse engineer where this came from. And I still fully believe that if this gets done well and gets across the finish line, which I'm still obviously holding on to hope that it will, it's got the potential to cause a ripple effect that's going to really fundamentally change global agriculture.
Yeah.
And I think obviously Secretary Vilsack understood that. I think Secretary Rollins to a lesser extent, but she is, obviously getting. She's spoken positively about 45Z and has it as a priority. So hopefully it gets across the finish line. But yeah, it takes it takes folks like our buddy Bill Hohenstein that are there to continue to fight the good fight for us. But I don't know. We'll see how it happens. But just crazy to think the journey that this thing has been on and how policy goes back and forth, right? And like so many farmers I talk to, they're like, man, this has been 3.5 years. Like, why is it taking so long? Like, just get it done. And I'm sure you've had a lot of those frustrating, days as well of like,
I mean,
man, why is it?
I only chuckle because everyone's saying it's been, we've been working on E15 for 10 years. So
Yeah, yeah. I forget what was the other one somebody was talking about. There was a different similar credit that it was 10 years from the time it was started to the time they actually got the guidance on it. Crazy long difference between them. And it might have been I don't remember. It don't matter. But I think hopefully this can at least keep moving, get across the finish line. We know that there are at least some key folks that understand how important it is, and I think that's what this takes is having some of those champions that are gonna move the needle, get it across the finish line, and ultimately my piece is like, let's just get it done, and we deal with it from there, and we continue to advocate for changes where needed, but at least to get something started.
And they may not get it, it probably won't be perfect. But if they do it, if they get it in a better place, you can continue to, if people see progress with it, I think they'll continue to want to make it better and more usable. And that, is important because, whether we're talking about water or climate or soil health, it's not going to change overnight. And so we need to keep seeing progress.
And you and Robert Bonnie wrote a op-ed or wrote a letter about it. Where did that come from? Or like what compelled you guys to do that? Or, maybe what's your angle on continuing to beat this drum that you're not in DC right now?
Well, I mean, I think it's important given where the economy for agriculture is right now that we don't turn our back on any potential markets. I don't think even with the rosiest thoughts about trade that we can just ship enough product overseas to fix all the issues we have right now. I think we've got to find, the same way that biofuels were initially, or, expansion of livestock was at various points in time beneficial to increasing demand. We've got to figure out, how do we raise demand, or how do we find new ways to take what we grow and raise and turn it into something worth a little bit more. And I think, that there's promise here. And I think that, whether you're looking at it from a climate lens like we did in the Biden administration, or a health lens the way they are now, or whether, like the state of Iowa that's involved in so much investment in conservation, but is reliant on USDA and NRCS for a lot of what goes in field. There's a lot of things that make this still worthwhile, and still, there's still a reason to push to get it right.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to say thank you for keeping on it, and you and Robert. I put the letter, the opinion in the chat for everybody that wants to check it out. I thought it was really well done, and yeah, thank you for keeping up on it, because obviously you don't have to, and you're involved in other stuff, So,
well, I mean, when we published that interim final rule, we very much, to borrow a very used, tired term, thought we left the ball on the 2-yard line, and all they had to do was, push it in and spike the ball, and and so like that hasn't quite been done yet, and so we want to make sure that just because it was done under the rubric of greenhouse gases and climate, that it wasn't forgotten, as some things can get to be.
I totally agree, and that's why like the pieces that we want to see adjusted in there seem to be pretty minimal, and like really shouldn't be that hard. Obviously, things were delayed between January and July 4th when Big Beautiful Bill got done, so obviously that held it up. But now, hopefully, it does kind of get done, get across the finish line. That it was like so stinking close. Now, one of those things that you and I talked about right after it went live, and it's still very relevant now, is where I think things got fumbled was IRS, Treasury, they put out their rule a week before you guys and DOE put out the technical guidelines and the updated the 45Z CF GREET model. And I asked you, like, hey, why didn't they tie them together? And you're like, well, Treasury didn't want to tie in something that wasn't live yet. And I'm like, well, they tied in the 45Z CF GREET model and it wasn't live yet. You're like, that's a good point. Now, they just did the same thing with the IRS guidance from a couple weeks ago where they said there's going to be a 45Z CF FDCIC. Well, it's not a thing right now either. So very interesting on like where they choose to name something or tie in something that doesn't exist yet versus one that does. And like even the USDA technical guidelines, they didn't tie in the actual interim final rule that is live. Like it is super legit already. And instead of actually tying that in, they said that there's going to be an updated, thing. I forget the exact terminology, but very interesting on like where they actually tie in a rule, whether it be live or not yet, or whether they specifically bring something in. But I don't know. Interesting of like, it just seems like it's so close to being across the finish line, and just the semantics on the words.
Well, or I mean, semantics or what is said, what is not said.
Yeah.
Because I think Seth Meyer, former USDA chief economist, left at the end of last year, and has since been talking about some of these things that were said or were not said, and a couple weeks ago, he said they could have pointed directly to our rule that we spent a lot of time working on before the change in administration, after the change in administration. So it's not a mystery to the folks at Treasury. So it is a little disappointing that they weren't more explicit about how and where this could work.
100%. And even now with writing the rule, that they still didn't take that time to be more explicit. But okay, we got a bunch of questions here. So and we've taken almost a full hour already. It's been crazy. This got really, really fast, but hopefully it's been interesting for everyone. So there's an anonymous person. What do you think the chances are that this will get done, given the uncertainty? Like, do you still think that it will, or are you not super optimistic?
So I think it will still happen. I think but it only happens with folks in agriculture continuing to push for it, and I don't think, here's where I don't think partisan politics matters, except that you have to get the current administration to understand that this is popular with a whole bunch of Republicans, not just Democrats who were worried about climate. There are a whole bunch of benefits that can go along with this if farmers adopt a lot of these practices at a higher rate than they have to this point in time. So I think like that education is important to get. And again, as you said, it's not necessarily convincing these folks that, hey, this is a great rule for reducing carbon intensity, but there's all these other things that go along with it.
Yeah.
You do that.
And we did have a EO 12866 meeting with OMB. So and a lot of the folks on, I spoke a lot about it, but the IRS rule went through a White House review process with the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. And so we were chosen for one of the meetings, and our feedback was very clear. Include the farmers, in a feedstock calculator, and we kind of left it open on whether it be one driven by DOE or the USDA calculator. Just get one done. And then our other key point was book and claim, right? So we're that was the 2 points: include the farmer, feedstock CI, and use a book and claim. And then we had a bunch of information behind that. And obviously, we'll continue to monitor very closely when this rule goes over to OMB. I haven't looked here yet today, but it's my understanding that, and speaking to, there's a question on the timeline and stuff, the technical guidelines that we've been talking about that Tim was a part of putting together January of last year, they first went live. Now the updated version is due to go live. I was told due to go live before planting. Now, it has to still go through White House review, Office of Management and Budget. The notice that it's in review is public. The actual rule and the details, that's not going to be public until after the review is complete. But to the timeline and whatnot, I was being told when I was in D.C. a couple weeks ago, kind of a April, early May type of time frame around planting, which would be phenomenal. Now, as Tim and I've kind of alluded to, we know that there is a lot of headwinds, but I do think that it's at least still a key part of the conversation. Yep. And the folks I was meeting with, do think that it's going to get done, but I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Tim?
I would say if you were told April, May, I think it's fair to think it would be before Memorial Day.
Yeah, hopefully. One of the things, too, we've been talking about the RVOs, the Renewable Volume Obligations from the Renewable Fuel Standard. EPA did send their rule to OMB for review last week. So it is good that there's some of these other, biofuel-esque policy that is making progress. So hopefully that incentivizes this getting done. But a couple of things here. Daryl asked about the areas of record keeping and stuff. And in the technical guidelines, it lays out the records that you'll have to keep regarding fertilizer, planting, yield, cover crop, manure, and Continuum Ag. Obviously, that's what we do. We have the software to help collect all of that stuff and keeping things like receipts, as applied maps, imagery, and Daryl, reach out to any of us. We can walk you through those details. But that part was very detailed. And Tim, you kind of you said and how you guys had to get the rule done. A lot of detail on what evidence is required, how to audit it. All of that was like super detailed.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Treasury folks and the IRS folks, think about, okay, where can waste, fraud, and abuse take place? And so, they were very explicit with us that we had to have a system that, could be audited and not just, oh, I think it was this day. And, again, they didn't understand agriculture. They didn't understand that, farmers are very careful with this information because they're already using it for a lot of other things. They already have to report their acreage. They already have to report, when they, they're making decisions based on a growing season. So they're going to know the date that they planted something. They're going to know the date they applied something. But they didn't understand this.
Yeah. Well, and we know that there's a wide array of different record, and we saw that when we did our initial audit. We were able to collect what was required, though, to pass through the audits, and it is a lot of data. It's a lot of record keeping, but why I like it is the financial upside and opportunity could be more than enough to justify keeping good records, utilizing this precision technology, and exactly like you said, most of this stuff, you need it anyway. And keeping good records is just a good business thing anyway. Now you can just actually utilize it to get some outcomes. But, okay, last couple things. We're going to run out of time. The book and claim versus mass balance is a question in there. In the initial technical guidelines, there was a mention and lean towards mass balance. But do you have any insights on where that came from? And what I tell people is that's how the European market works. I don't know if that's where that came from, or it just you had to kind of pick a lane. And
I don't remember, Mitchell. Thinking about how we do have to document some things for international trade. That may have been where mass balance started off. Thinking that would be in and of itself enough. I think that with some of the meetings that biofuel producers had in talking about, okay, how do we implement this, and saying, obviously we can control the
Actual suppliers, yeah.
well, I mean, we can try and control, the corn we buy, but that's just in our grain shed. That's just in the doesn't mean that somebody 1,000 miles away who doesn't have an ethanol plant close to them doesn't want to try and access this market. And so thinking about how do you maximize the availability of that feedstock, makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I think at least my observation on the conversation I've had and stuff from the outside looking in, is mass balance actually is kind of the right way to do it. Like it actually is more legit, right? When you have low carbon crop actually going to produce low carbon fuel to go into these markets, like that is the right way to do it. But if you want affordability, if you want to drive change at scale, if you want to drive a program that could work at scale out the gate, book and claim is a lot easier because it allows everybody to be in. And we're ready for either one. And obviously, as as everybody knows, push very aggressively for book and claim. But and there is some precedent too. So in 45Z, they can use renewable energy certificates or RECs, and those are book and claim. You can use when you're talking about renewable natural gas, it's all done on a book and claim. The RINs, and we're talking about the renewable volumetric obligations, that's all based on a book and claim. But like I said, the European market for ISCC, it's mass balance. And some of these other actual like direct market access, they're mass balance. So it's a sticky one for sure. And I don't know. We'll see how it shapes up. But and the last kind of question, you hit on it mostly earlier, but how this will tie into some of that global demand, and we know that the interest in low carbon sustainable fuel is a big deal. And obviously, as we're looking at competing against Brazil, it's the conversation about deforestation obviously has a role there. Stable, long-term, productive markets, and now also the data that we can provide. I think they all play a role when talking about foreign opportunity.
Yeah, and if we're not at the table on this, if we're not trying to drive it and lead it, we're not going to get a system that works for us. Coming into the 40B and 45Z conversations, part of the reason there was one of the first big hurdles was to make sure that Greek could be used, was because the ICAO accounting system gave Brazil this tremendous advantage on their corn, because their corn is considered to be second crop. So, their soybeans that they've deforested and torn up grassland for, suffer all the penalty. And then their corn, because it's considered to be their second crop, has no penalty applied to it, and that was to us bananas, and so like we had to have an accounting system that was fair for American agriculture.
Yeah, I think it's back to thinking bigger picture on like what do we really want to incentivize here, and I think if 45Z can be done well and get across the finish line, it's going to incentivize a lot of good. So. All right, we've taken the whole time, and I told Tim we would hard stop because I know he's a busy guy. I've got more meetings too, but Tim, this has been super insightful. Hopefully, everybody else enjoyed it as much as I do. Really appreciate again your efforts, your leadership in this, and your willingness to sit down and have a conversation too, and be so open with us. So we'll keep fighting the good fight, and let me know however I can continue to help you in your efforts, of course, as well. And everybody on, appreciate you taking the time here. We're going to keep fighting for this thing. I'm still obviously extremely optimistic, and we know that it is as close as ever to getting across the finish line. And we, as Tim was getting at, as we've been talking here, we got to keep the pressure on folks in DC, and that continue to be a squeaky wheel in a good way, and encouraging these folks to go and get this done. If you haven't gotten your CI score yet, you are definitely behind. You need to understand what your CI is and what data goes into it. That's free. and start talking with your ethanol plants. I was just at the National Ethanol Conference last week down in Orlando. 45Z was part of it was a top item in conversation. Of course, E15 and RVOs was important as well, but 45Z was right there. They are very much trying to get this done, and it's all hands on deck to keep seeing things through. So, anyway, we'll talk about it more on the CI Chit Chats coming up every Tuesday morning, or just about every Tuesday morning. We talk about the latest updates, and we'll continue to push this out there. But any final word from your side, Tim?
No, I mean, if you've spent enough time, I mean, if you spent an hour listening to Mitchell and me today, you're obviously interested in this, and I would just urge you to not take your eye off the ball on this until we know that they are going to incorporate the USDA guidelines and tie into the whatever they're going to call the low carbon feedstock rule, so that farmers do have an opportunity to benefit from this in a way that would be good for the bottom line.
Yeah, I think I'm keeping on it. I'm optimistic that they will, and thanks again for your leadership in setting this thing up so that we even have a chance for it to be there.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, Tim. Good to chat, and we'll see you around.